I had never doubted her before. She was always so honest, so steady. So, when she texted me that she was heading to her evening yoga class, I believed it. But when I glanced at my phone just before dinner, the notification was there, a familiar ping that usually meant something urgent. A text from my smartwatch app, activity report. It showed her heart rate was normal, but the movement? Barely anything. Just a few steps. Nothing that would match an hour-long yoga class. I felt a jolt of confusion and something darker, something like betrayal. It wasn't that I thought she was hiding anything sinister. It was more that I was missing something, something she hadn't told me. When she walked in that night, the first thing I noticed was the glint of exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness that had become a familiar guest in our home over the past few weeks. But she smiled. She smiled like everything was okay. She made some joke about her yoga instructor being extra tough tonight, and how she was exhausted from all the advanced stretches. I wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling in my chest wouldn't let me. I let it go that night. I couldn't bring myself to confront her over something so small, or so it seemed. Maybe I was overthinking things. I had been stressed too. So, I didn't say anything when we went to bed, even though my mind kept replaying the numbers on my smartwatch. How could she have spent an hour at yoga and barely moved? But the next day, I couldn't shake it. The small lie, if it was even a lie, haunted me. I had always trusted her, and yet now I was questioning the very foundation of that trust. Was she hiding something from me? Was this a sign of something bigger, a sign that she was pushing me away without me even noticing? I had to know. I had to find out what was really going on. So, I waited. I watched. I pretended everything was normal. We went about our day, but every time she grabbed her phone, I caught myself glancing at her smartwatch. I couldn't help it. And there it was again, no activity. No movement. She hadn't gone to yoga. It was absurd, I told myself. Maybe she just forgot to wear it, maybe there was a glitch. Yet, as I continued to look at the steady, unchanging readings of her smartwatch, a knot formed in my stomach. There was no way it was a coincidence. I needed to talk to her. But the thought of confronting her about something so small felt ridiculous. Could I really accuse her of lying over something so trivial? And yet, this was the first time I'd ever doubted her. And now, I couldn't stop. By the time she came home that evening, the tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just her strange behavior anymore. It was my reaction to it, how I could no longer see her without wondering what she was hiding. The tiniest things, the way she smiled, the way she glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking, seemed like signals, clues that I was too blind to notice before. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked casually as she set down her bag, her eyes meeting mine with a spark of warmth. "Fine," I said, keeping my tone light. I needed to sound casual. I couldn't let her think anything was wrong. "How was yoga?" Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly, a brief flash of something unreadable in her eyes. "It was good. Tiring. You know how it is." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. She was lying. I knew she was lying. I wanted to demand answers, to pull the truth out of her, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not like this. I took a deep breath, pushing aside the rising storm in my chest. "That's good. I didn't know you were so into yoga lately." "It's been good for my body," she said, shrugging. But there was a hesitation in her voice, like she wasn't entirely sure of what she was saying. A crack in the facade. We ate dinner together, the conversation light and harmless, but all I could think about was the missing pieces. The incongruity between what she said and the data on the watch. The way she looked at me when I asked about yoga, like she was playing a game I didn't understand. I had to know the truth. And then, after dinner, I saw it again. Her phone, lying face up on the counter. The screen lit up, showing notifications of messages from friends and a few reminders for the day. But it was the notification at the top that caught my attention. Activity, 0 steps today. My heart sank. 0 steps? I didn't know if I was imagining things or if I was truly seeing the signs of something breaking between us. Maybe it was just a glitch. Or maybe it was a wake-up call. The thought that she could be hiding something, no matter how small, made me feel like I was losing control over everything I thought I knew about her, and about us. Later, when she went to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at my smartwatch app, overanalyzing every detail. I needed to confront her, but I also didn't know if I was ready for the truth. Could she have been lying to me about something so trivial? Or was I simply imagining things? The uncertainty gnawed at me. Something was off, but I had no idea how deep it went. Would I ever truly know what was behind her yoga class, or whatever had really happened that night? Or would this small mystery unravel into something much bigger than I was prepared for? I had to find out. I couldn't let this linger in the back of my mind anymore. But when I finally talked to her, when I finally asked the question, would I be prepared for what I might hear? It had been a few days since I'd seen the unsettling readings on her smartwatch. Each time she mentioned yoga or going to the gym, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread twist inside me. The silence between us had deepened, like a quiet gap stretching wider with every passing day, even though we both tried to act as though nothing had changed. But something had. Something that I couldn't shake off, something that had planted itself in my mind and refused to let go. That evening, after we'd finished dinner, I noticed her slipping her shoes on as she grabbed her gym bag. She'd been heading out for what, to her, probably felt like a routine. But to me, it felt like the opening of a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked slightly in the way I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. But the nagging need to know was overwhelming. She looked at me, surprised by the question. She paused for a moment before replying with that familiar smile. "To yoga, of course," she said, almost too casually. "Right," I replied, standing up from the couch and glancing at my watch. I had no idea what I was hoping for, some kind of confirmation that everything was fine, maybe. But I couldn't fight the urge to ask, to push further. I started, and then faltered. "I noticed that the last few times you've gone, the tracker hasn't shown any steps or activity." My words sounded almost foreign to me, as if I was hearing them for the first time. I felt like a stranger to myself in that moment. But the silence that followed, the hesitation in her eyes as she processed my words, made my heart drop into my stomach. I don't know," she said softly, her voice betraying a sense of uncertainty I hadn't noticed before. "Maybe the app isn't working properly. It's been acting up." I didn't buy it. I knew she was lying. But a part of me wasn't ready to push harder, to dig deeper into what could be a much more complicated story than I could handle. I couldn't let it all unravel like this, not without knowing the full picture. Not yet. Instead, I nodded and smiled back, though the gesture felt hollow, like a mask I was putting on just to maintain the facade. "Okay. Well, I guess I'll see you later." She left, and I stayed behind, unable to shake the feeling that there was something more lurking beneath the surface. That night, after she left for her yoga class, I found myself in front of my phone, scrolling through the data again. I pulled up the app that synced with her smartwatch and started reviewing the activity history. It wasn't a habit, or at least it hadn't been, until now. But now, it felt like the only way to find the answers I so desperately needed. Each workout or run she'd logged, there were hardly any, but what struck me the most was the consistency of her excuse. Every time, the numbers didn't match. Every time, the activity reported back was nothing. No steps. No activity. The last month was full of nothingness. I tried not to overthink it, but the truth was clear as day. My mind kept circling back to the idea of trust, the one thing we always had in our relationship. What was I supposed to do with all this doubt? All these empty statistics? Why was she hiding something from me? I couldn't help it anymore. I had to know. By the time she came home that night, the tension had settled into my bones. I'd barely moved from the couch, my mind racing with unanswered questions. She entered the room, and I felt my pulse quicken. Something about her presence, the way she stood there, made my heart beat faster than usual. "How was yoga?" I asked, almost too casually, hoping for something, anything, that could reassure me. The look on her face gave away nothing, just that practiced, warm smile that never failed to make me feel safe. She took a deep breath, settling onto the couch beside me. "It was good. Really exhausting, actually." I glanced at her, my eyes scanning her face, trying to read her. "I noticed the app didn't pick up any movement again," I said, my voice carefully neutral. For a moment, she froze. Her smile faltered, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, the hesitation that lingered just beneath the surface. But she recovered quickly. "It's a glitch, I told you," she said, the same word she'd used before. But this time, I didn't let it slide. "I don't think it's a glitch," I said, my voice steady but laced with uncertainty. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what I was expecting to hear. But the truth felt like it was just on the other side of that moment, if I could only break through. "Why aren't you telling me the truth?" I asked before I could stop myself. My voice was softer than I intended, but the words hung heavy in the air. "What's really going on?" She looked at me, her eyes wide, her face a mix of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Her lips parted as if she were about to say something, but then she closed them again. A breath escaped her. She swallowed hard. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. My heart twisted. "Hurt me? What do you mean?" She looked down at her hands, fumbling with the hem of her shirt. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to think I was hiding something from you." The words hung in the air, but there was something about them that made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something huge. My stomach tightened as I waited for her to continue. "I've been seeing someone," she finally admitted, her voice trembling. "I've been going to see him instead of yoga." The room felt like it shrank around me, the walls closing in as the weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. My mind raced as I tried to process what she had just said, tried to understand the implications of the words I had just heard. My heart was pounding in my chest, but there was only one question that escaped my lips. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her gaze dropping again. "His name is Mark. He's the one who's been helping me with personal training. It's not what you think. It's just workouts and—" "Why didn't you tell me?" I cut her off, my voice shaking with frustration. "Why keep it a secret?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. "Because I didn't want you to feel like I was pulling away from you. I didn't want you to think that there was something wrong with our relationship." I could feel my world shifting, everything I thought I knew about us being thrown into chaos. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how this had happened, how something so small, so innocent at first, could spiral into something so much bigger than I was prepared for. But most of all, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her again. But that, in itself, would be the hardest thing of all. The days that followed felt like a fog, a haze of uncertainty and disbelief. I couldn't tell if I was still standing on solid ground or if everything beneath me had begun to crumble. The conversation with her, the truth she'd confessed, replayed in my mind over and over, each repetition gnawing away at my peace of mind. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that this was just a misunderstanding, that there was some innocent explanation for the situation. But the weight of what she'd said lingered, heavy and inescapable. Her words echoed in my ears. "I've been seeing someone. His name is Mark. He's the one who's been helping me with personal training." Personal training. That was how it had started, at least, that was her story. But my gut told me there was more to it. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't adding up. If it was just personal training, why the secrecy? Why not tell me from the beginning? I spent that entire evening alone, staring at the same four walls, replaying everything in my mind. I tried to think of reasons I hadn't considered, ways I could rationalize what had happened. Maybe I was overreacting, maybe I was being paranoid. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the gnawing doubt. The next morning, I decided to confront her again. Not with accusations, but with a simple, calm conversation. I needed to know the truth, the full truth. I needed her to be open with me, even if it meant facing something painful. When she walked in, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, trying to gather my thoughts. She looked different somehow, distant, like she knew something had changed between us. Her smile, once so genuine, seemed forced now, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me anymore. "Morning," she said softly, her voice tentative. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound neutral, though my tone carried an edge I hadn't meant to show. She sat down across from me, her eyes flickering to my face before quickly looking away. I could see her fingers trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. The tension was thick in the air, a palpable thing between us. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice steady but heavy with the weight of the conversation I knew we had to have. "About what you told me last night. About Mark." She flinched, and I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. It made my heart ache, but I knew I had to push forward. "I just need to understand, okay?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why didn't you tell me about him sooner? Why keep it a secret?" Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but then she hesitated. She seemed to be struggling with something, guilt, shame, or maybe both. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't think it would get this far. I didn't think you'd ever find out." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. "You didn't think I'd ever find out?" I asked, incredulous. "How could you not think I'd find out?" I'm your partner, your boyfriend. I thought we were supposed to be honest with each other. She lowered her gaze, tears welling in her eyes. I know, she said, her voice trembling. I messed up. I should have told you. But I didn't know how. And when things started getting more complicated between us, I didn't know what to do. The guilt was written all over her face. I could see it, feel it, hanging in the space between us. But it wasn't just her guilt I was feeling, it was mine too. I felt betrayed, and yet, there was a part of me that wanted to forgive her, to give her another chance. I didn't know if I was doing it because I loved her, or if I was simply too afraid to lose her. Complicated how? I asked, my voice quieter now, the anger from earlier dissipating as I tried to make sense of everything. She paused for a long moment, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. I didn't go to yoga. Not because I was too busy or because I wasn't in the mood. I stopped going because I didn't want to go to yoga. I wanted to go to him. She paused again, a deep sigh escaping her lips. Mark and we've been seeing each other. More than just personal training. I didn't want to admit it to myself at first, but I think I started to have feelings for him. The words hit like a punch to the gut. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She had feelings for him. The man she'd been lying to me about. The man she'd been hiding from me. My mind raced, my thoughts jumbled. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers. But I held it together, barely. So this wasn't just personal training? It wasn't just workouts. No, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It was more. And I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could handle it, that I could keep everything separate. But I can't. I can't keep lying to you. Her words felt like a weight, pressing down on me until I wasn't sure if I could take it anymore. I wanted to reach out and pull her close, to tell her that I forgave her, to let it all slide and pretend like it hadn't shattered something in me. But I couldn't. The trust one had in her was broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. I stood up suddenly, pacing the small kitchen. My head was spinning. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I needed space. I needed to think. But she was here, sitting in front of me, and all I could see was her tear-streaked face. I don't know what to say, I said, my voice hoarse. I don't know if I can forgive you. She stood up slowly, her eyes pleading. Please, just let me explain. Let me make it right. Make it right? I echoed, turning to face her. How do you make something like this right? You've lied to me for weeks, maybe longer, and now you want to make it right. She took a step toward me, but I took a step back. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or to listen to her apologies. I needed time. I needed to understand everything. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice cracking. I thought I knew you. I thought I knew everything about you. I'm still the same person, she said quickly, her voice desperate. I haven't changed. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but I still love you. The words hit me like a punch in the chest, but they didn't bring comfort. I wanted to believe them, to feel that familiar warmth from her words. But the truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. I need some time, I said, shaking my head. I need to think. I can't just pretend everything's okay. She nodded, tears spilling from her eyes. I understand, she whispered. I'm so sorry. And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, in the silence of our broken trust. I didn't know how I felt about her anymore. I didn't know how to fix what was broken. And most of all, I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were before. The days dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Time seemed to move in slow motion, stretching out into something unbearable as I grappled with the broken pieces of everything that had once felt so certain. I'd spent the last few days in a strange limbo, too confused to move forward, too hurt to go back. The space between us had become a chasm, one neither of us seemed to know how to cross. She hadn't tried to reach out. It was as if she, too, had taken a step back, unsure of what to say, afraid of making things worse. I didn't blame her, though. I had made it clear that I needed time. And truth be told, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what she had to say, or if I even wanted to. It wasn't just the betrayal I was struggling with, it was the deception, the way she'd hidden everything from me. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that she'd been lying for weeks, months even, pretending everything was fine while secretly building a life with someone else. It wasn't just the fact that she'd crossed a boundary, it was the way she'd crossed it without a second thought, without considering the damage she was causing. I couldn't shake the image of her with him, the man who had taken her away from me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, sharing moments I should have been part of. The thought twisted in my gut, but I couldn't stop it. I tried to busy myself with work, with small tasks, with anything that might distract me from the aching emptiness inside. But nothing worked. The silence between us was louder than anything I could fill it with. And then there was the shame. I couldn't escape it. There were moments when I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, for not realizing the subtle changes in her behavior, the way she'd become distant, the way she'd started spending more time out of the house. Maybe I had ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to admit the truth. I didn't want to believe that she would ever betray me. It was a Friday when I couldn't take it any longer. The silence had become too much, the tension too suffocating. I needed answers, needed to hear it from her again, to understand how far this had gone, how much of it had been real, how much of it had been a lie. I called her. It was a simple message at first. Just a few words. "Can we talk?" Her response came quickly, too quickly, as if she'd been waiting for it. A simple, "I'm on my way." When she arrived, she looked the same, worn, fragile, as though the weight of her actions had begun to show in her eyes. But there was something else too, something that hadn't been there before. It was fear, or maybe it was guilt, but it was a shadow that clung to her now, one that hadn't been there in the past. "I didn't know if I should come," she said softly, stepping inside but standing a few feet away, as though she didn't want to overstep. "I didn't want to pressure you." I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I need to know, for real, what happened. I need to understand how this all started. I need to hear everything, no more lies, no more half-truths." Her eyes welled up again. She didn't speak for a long moment, and I could see the struggle in her face, the conflict of wanting to make things right, but not knowing how. "Okay," she said, her voice small but resolute. "I'll tell you everything." I sat back, bracing myself for what I was about to hear. "I met Mark at the gym," she began, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It started with just workouts. Personal training. That was it. But as we spent more time together, we started talking more. About life, about things that weren't related to the gym. It was easy to talk to him. It felt like we had this connection that I didn't realize was forming." She paused, looking down, as if ashamed to continue. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to think I was looking for someone else. I wasn't. But then, it just happened." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "I started meeting him outside of the gym. We'd go for coffee, or take walks, or just talk. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but then it did. And I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to tell you what I was feeling. I was scared of what you would think." The air in the room felt thick, the weight of her words pressing down on me with each one. I wanted to ask more questions, to demand every detail, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt her. I needed to hear it all. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I couldn't help how I felt. And I didn't want to ruin everything we had. But I was already so deep into it by the time I realized what I was doing. And then I didn't know how to come back. I didn't know how to fix it." Her eyes searched mine for understanding, but I didn't know how to give it to her. My mind was swirling with questions, with hurt, with confusion. How had we gone from this, from what felt like an unbreakable connection, to her in front of me, confessing all this? How had things gotten so far? "You should have told me sooner," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the only thing I could bring myself to say in that moment. "I would have understood. We could have worked through it together. But instead, you kept it all from me." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I know. I'm sorry. I wish I had, too. I don't know why I didn't." For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with the weight of everything unsaid. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to take her back and try to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me, one I couldn't ignore, was telling me that I couldn't just move past this, that the trust was gone. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if we could fix it. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, the question hanging between us like a fragile thread. My voice was almost a whisper, as though I was afraid to hear the answer. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I want to make it right. I want us to be okay again, but I understand if you can't forgive me. I don't know if I can fix this, but I'll try." I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure what would come next. I didn't know if we could rebuild what we had, or if it had already been shattered beyond repair. But one thing was clear, the truth had come to light, and now, I had to decide what to do with it. And the hardest part was that I didn't know if I wanted to fight for us anymore. The following days were a blur. The weight of the conversation hung over me, suffocating every thought I tried to form. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see her face, the guilt, the pleading, the desperate attempt to make things right, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase what had already been done. I couldn't just forget about the lies, the deceit, the cold reality of everything that had unfolded behind my back. The next morning, I woke up with the taste of regret in my mouth. I didn't know what I wanted. What I knew, though, was that I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened, like I hadn't seen the cracks in everything we built. Trust wasn't something that could just be repaired with a simple apology or a promise to do better. It was something earned, something fought for, and right now, it felt like there was nothing left to fight for. I found myself walking through the same streets we used to walk together, but it was different now. Every corner, every familiar shop, every small part of this place held the echoes of memories that had once been sweet, and now they felt like daggers in my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that our entire relationship had been based on a lie. The love I thought we shared, the connection I thought was unshakable, how much of it was real? How much of it had I been blind to? I couldn't stop asking myself those questions, and with each passing hour, the answers I found didn't comfort me. They only served to deepen the chasm between us. I knew I had to make a choice. The longer I let this go unresolved, the more I was hurting myself, and hurting her, too. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with the decision that loomed before me, the one I'd been putting off for days. I had to face the truth, whatever that truth was. I reached for my phone and called her again. It was late, but she answered almost immediately. The sound of her voice made my stomach drop. "Hey," she said softly. "Are you okay?" I hesitated before speaking. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many things I needed to say, but right now, it all felt too heavy to put into words. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice rough, "about everything. About us." She didn't interrupt me, just listened. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted. The words tasted bitter, like I was swallowing glass, but I knew it was the truth. "I don't know if I can move forward with you. Not after everything. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can be who I was with you before." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, steady and slow, but there was an undeniable crack in her voice when she spoke. "I understand," she whispered. "I don't blame you. I don't know if I can forgive myself for what I've done, either. But if you can't be with me, I'll accept that. I'll understand if you need to walk away." And there it was. The finality of it. The understanding that, no matter how much we both wanted to find a way back to each other, something fundamental had broken between us. Trust, love, respect, everything had been fractured beyond repair. The foundation we'd built our lives on had crumbled, and no amount of apologies or explanations could put it back together. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring out the window, listening to the silence between us. And then, with a deep breath, I made the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. "I think it's best if we end things," I said, the words sounding strange, like they weren't even coming from me. But they were. They had to be. There was no other choice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I am too," I replied. "But sometimes, love isn't enough. And right now, it's not enough for me." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of that moment settle over me like 1,000 tons of concrete. The decision was made. The chapter was closed. And yet, as I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I couldn't stop thinking about all the good moments, all the times we'd laughed, the trips we'd taken, the plans we'd made. It didn't seem fair that it all had to end this way. But sometimes, the damage is too deep, and the love is not enough to fix it. The next few weeks were a blur of empty days and restless nights. I buried myself in work, kept myself busy, tried to distract myself from the pain. But no matter how many tasks I threw myself into, I couldn't escape the hollow ache that had taken root inside me. I missed her. I missed the way she made me feel, the way she used to hold me at night, the way we'd talk about our future as if nothing could ever tear us apart. But none of that mattered anymore. I spent the next few days sorting through the remnants of our relationship, old photos, mementos from vacations, small tokens that had once felt so important. I packed them all away, one by one, trying to make sense of it all. But it didn't make sense. None of it did. And then, on the fourth day, I received a message. It wasn't from her. It wasn't from anyone I expected. It was from Mark. I don't want to hurt her, the message read. I never wanted to be the reason things fell apart between you two. But I need you to know that she never stopped loving you. She's been struggling with what happened, and she's torn between what she feels and what she thinks she deserves. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My first instinct was to throw my phone across the room, but something kept me rooted in place. I had to respond. And so I did. I know, I wrote back, my fingers trembling as I typed. I know, and I wish things could have been different. But some things are too broken to fix. And right now, I need to be alone. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her. I didn't know if I ever would be. But what I did know was this: healing takes time, and it was something I needed to do on my own. As I looked out the window, the first rays of sunlight creeping over the horizon, I realized that, in the end, sometimes the hardest part isn't knowing when to let go. It's knowing when you've tried everything and the only thing left is to move on. And as painful as it was, that was exactly what I was doing. Moving on.